Today we're going to talk about similes and metaphors in just a minute.
Just a minute.
Most of the time, when we're talking or writing, we use literal language, words used exactly how they're defined. But how do you add excitement to a speech or conjure a vivid image in the mind of a reader? Figurative language is one way of doing this. With figurative language, the words express something other than their literal meaning. Okay, so now imagine you spent your whole weekend watching TV, and on Monday, when your friends ask you at school what'd you do this weekend, you might say, nothing. But obviously, you didn't do nothing. You binged an entire series, but you used this figure of speech to convey that you lounged around on a sofa for 2 days. Similes and metaphors are both figures of speech. A simile uses the words like or as to specify how two things are similar. For example, if you were embarrassed, you might say, my face turned red as an apple. This is an example of a simile since the word as compares your face to the color of an apple. Metaphors are slightly different. Instead of using like or as, a metaphor makes the comparison directly. If you're feeling tired after running around, you might say, my legs are rubber. But without like or as, we can be sure this is a metaphor. Why do you think authors use similes and metaphors in their work?
Don't be scared off by this academic sounding word. You probably made 20 inferences before lunch, regardless of whether or not you knew that that's what they're called. You do make inferences. Picture this. There's breakfast cereal all over the ground, and the box looks kind of chewed up, and your dog, who got into the cinnamon bread last week, is over there with a guilty look on his face. You naturally infer that the dog got into the breakfast cereal, right? And you're probably correct. That's an inference. An inference is just coming to a logical conclusion from whatever evidence you have. It's one of the most valuable thinking skills you can learn. And as for your wonderful but willpower impaired dog, well, there's clear evidence. One, he was home with the cereal that you forgot to put back in the cabinet. Two, he did this before with the cinnamon bread. And three, your dog, gotta love him, couldn't tell a lie to save his life. And he's totally broadcasting his guilt with that expression on his face. So, in life, you make inferences about things you see around you. In your language arts class, you make inferences in literature. Authors generally don't like spelling things out and making their meaning all obvious because that isn't what real life is like. And literature usually tries to reflect real life. What you need to do is look carefully at the evidence in the book or story you're reading, typically incomplete evidence, and figure out what it means. It's like looking at an incomplete drawing and using your imagination to complete it and figure out what it's a drawing of.
The great news is that we analyze characters all the time when we are reading, watching movies, or frankly, just living our lives. So, what I want you to do is think about the last time you met someone new, okay? Maybe you were like out to lunch with your parents and your dad ran into somebody that he knew. He introduces this new person to you. This is my colleague John, he says. You look at your dad's face. He's sincerely smiling. John is the best new sales rep in our company, your dad exclaims. John looks a little embarrassed. Pleased to meet you, he says quietly, shaking your hand. Then, I have to get going. My son's basketball game is about to start. You wave goodbye, and John goes on with his life. But you have just been introduced to a character, and you have formed an analysis of him, whether you knew it or not. From this short introduction, you actually have a wealth of information about the character. You have what your father's told you. You have the way your father reacted to John. You have what John himself said. And you have what he did when he met you. This is the same type of information we use when analyzing a character in literature. What the character says and does, and what other characters say about them, or how other characters react to them, all aid in our analysis. When we are collecting evidence for our analyses, this is what we should be looking for. And this information will help us to develop a well-rounded character analysis every time.